Tu as compris, toi? Ah oui. Présenté. Bon. Madame la ministre, chers intervenants, et puis Madame la présidente de Sant'Egidio, en France, oui, en France, chère Valérie, j'avais prévu de faire un petit mot d'accueil pour vous dire le plaisir que j'ai à vous accueillir, pour plein de raisons. Alors, il y en a une qui pourrait être uniquement d'origine géographique, c'est que Sant'Egidio, France, est dans le 5e arrondissement. Mais ça ne suffit pas.
Sant'Egidio, France, is located in the 5th arrondissement, although that's, you know, we were talking about the community, a community in spirit and action for years. Sant'Egidio is a player at the local level. It is a player that reflects and also acts. And so us local administrators and at the highest levels should be inspired by Sant'Egidio, should draw inspiration from it. Sant'Egidio, with you, with your association, decided here to organize every noon, every Sunday at lunch, opportunities, lunches. We use the the cooking facilities of an organization that is based here in the Mairie. We've organized many such initiatives, which are very important. The Christmas dinner, very important here in this large hall. But our town hall, you know, I just live here, but it's very important that you know that men and women of goodwill can benefit from this place. This environment is probably, this arrondissement is probably the prettiest in the whole of Paris. This is another reason why we...
Alors, la paix, ça n'est pas qu'une utopie.
The interpreter apologizes, but because of the sound, it's very difficult to provide proper interpretation. It's important to talk, to discuss matters, but this afternoon we are going to be addressing a very, very important topic, which is the ecological transition. We have done a lot of greenwashing, and the protection of our planet, the protection of the environment in which we live, implies the concept of peace. If we continue to destroy, to ruin, to damage the environment that we live in, peace is threatened, especially in the younger populations, which are threatened, climate refugees, fragile people who don't have the means, say, to receive medical treatment, to go to an ear, nose and throat doctor. So provide us with some suggestions as to solutions, some practical solutions. Quite modestly here, we have drafted a climate plan. Of course, we're a microcosm, but here, this is the arrondissement with the largest number of schools, of educational facilities. It's the highest number per capita. So it is an area where there are a lot of areas just for pedestrians, so pedestrian areas. These are simple initiatives. They're things that we can share with you and with others. And I hope that your discussion today may be very rich and fruitful. Thank you, Florence.
Personnellement, Florence et la mairie du 5e de nous avoir mis à disposition la salle des fêtes pour
I would like to thank Florence and the municipality of the 5th arrondissement for placing at our disposal this salon des fêtes. The seat of Sant'Egidio, Paris, is located in this 5th arrondissement, and this is perfectly in line with our desire to stand next to the poor in a civilized Christian manner. And with you as a local administrator, the Christmas meal takes place and is served at this beautiful ballroom. And I want to thank you and all of your staff for welcoming us so cordially. I do hope that we will have constructive exchanges in order to imagine peace.
Thank you, Mayor. It's indeed a very good beginning to discussing this important panel, and so happy to know that in your own way you are contributing to ecological transition in this beautiful city of Paris. Congratulations. Friends, my name is Sudheendra Kulkarni, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. I'm from India. Just a few housekeeping points for your consideration. We'll have enough time for meaningful interaction. So keep your questions ready, short comments ready in writing, and these will be collected by members of the community and brought to the panel. Permit me to make some introductory remarks just to set the tone for the discussion. Friends, yesterday, a conference had its inaugural at the Grand Palais des Congrès. This is the very venue where the historic Paris Agreement on climate was signed in 2015. The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. Its overarching goal, as we all know, is to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade, above pre-industrial levels, and pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Sadly, the world is nowhere near achieving these commitments. In the same year, 2015, the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The theme of sustainable development encompassed the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Again, the world is nowhere near achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals before 2030. The theme of this forum, ecological transition, is, figuratively speaking, a child born by these two international agreements. This child is now nearly 10 years old. And today we are asking ourselves this question: is this child growing in a healthy manner, or is it having a stunted growth? In other words, is the ecological transition still on the agenda? The very formulation of this theme shows our skepticism, our concern, even our alarm. Why this concern? Why this alarm? A major reason is climate change. This morning, friends, I came across a witty but profoundly wise message on Twitter, which is now strangely called X. The message said, in the good old days, climate change meant change from spring to summer to autumn to winter, and after winter, back to beautiful, hope-giving spring. The message conveyed the eternal truth, that is, Mother Nature is kind, compassionate, and caring towards all. However, now climate change has an altogether different and menacing meaning. It means whether human life or life in general, as we have known it, will survive on planet Earth if we continue to raise the planet's temperature due to reckless human economic activity. Right now, as we are having this meeting in Paris, world leaders are meeting at the UN headquarters in New York for the Summit of the Future. Ecological transition is at the very heart of the future of humanity. Can we effectively combat climate change to protect the oceans, seas, marine resources? Can we stop desertification? Can we save the people from recurrent floods and droughts? Can we reverse the problem of environmental refugees? Ecological justice has now become a key component of global justice, and we are witnessing ecological injustice almost every single day. Those who are contributing the least to the climate crisis are paying the highest price for it, be it in Africa, Pakistan, Bangladesh, my own country, India, and other parts of the global south, because those who are contributing the most to the crisis are not doing enough to end it. Therefore, to ensure ecological transition in a time-bound manner, here are some key questions that we should discuss in this panel. 1, how rapidly are we achieving the transition from fossil fuels to renewable resources? 2nd, electric mobility. The transport sector is one of the main contributors to pollution, air pollution. Is the world investing enough in sustainable urban, regional, and electric transport mobility? 3rd, are we dramatically improving efficiency in energy use? 4, are we making big breakthroughs in energy storage? 5, are we conserving energy and water and ending pesticides and pollutants in agriculture? 6, are we doing enough for the protection of precious biodiversity? Next, are we adopting circular economy as a way of life so that all the materials we use in our economic activities are designed to be able to regenerate themselves? Above all, friends, how can we ensure that the nearly 1 billion people condemned to live in poverty in this beautiful and bountiful world of ours, 1 billion people living in poverty, how can we lift them out of poverty, which is in fact SDG number 1, Sustainable Development Goal number 1, and how are we going to reduce wealth disparities both between the nations and also within nations? And of course, which countries are doing more in terms of their ecological transition and which countries are inactive? These are the questions we shall discuss in this panel. We have an eminent panel who bring rich experience, expertise. We're going to start the discussion, and I'm told that we have one of the panelists who is coming via video link. Is that right? Dr. Jonathan Safran Foer from the United States. He's a writer and essayist. A writer, his grandparents were Holocaust survivors and of Polish descent. A graduate of Princeton University, he became famous for his first novel, Everything is Illuminated, the story of a young American Jew who travels to Ukraine to find the woman who saved his grandfather from genocide. His writing career has continued successfully. He has received numerous awards, including the Guardian First Book Prize, the National Jewish Book Award, and the New York Public Library Young Lions Prize. So friends, let's welcome Dr. Jonathan Safran Foer. Thank you.
Hello, can everybody hear me? I assume the connection is okay. One minor correction to that very generous introduction. I'm not a doctor of any kind. So I'm neither prepared to perform surgeries nor comment on contemporary literature. But I can talk about some of my personal experiences and how they have influenced my ways of understanding the climate crisis and hopefully participating in a productive way. One such experience is I have a 7-week-old baby, which is why I am not in Paris right now, and it's also why I'm not going to be able to stay for the entirety of the panel, much as I wish I could. I will be very eager to watch it afterwards and to absorb the wisdom of the very thoughtful speakers. So just a few remarks. In 1942, a 28-year-old Catholic in the Polish underground, Jan Karski, embarked on a mission to travel from Nazi-occupied Poland to London and ultimately America to inform leaders of what the Germans were perpetrating. In preparation for his journey, he met with several resistance groups, accumulating information and testimonies to bring to the West. In his memoir, he recounts a meeting with the head of the Jewish Socialist Alliance. And this is a quote: "The leader gripped my arm with such violence that it ached. I looked into his wild, staring eyes with awe, moved by the deep, unbearable pain in them. Tell the leaders that this is no case for politics or tactics. Tell them that the earth must be shaken to its foundation. The world must be aroused. Perhaps then it will wake up, understand, and perceive." That's the end of the quote. After surviving as perilous a journey as could be imagined, Karski arrived in Washington, D.C. in June 1943. There he met with Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, one of the great legal minds in American history, and himself a Jew. After hearing Karski's account of the clearing of the Warsaw Ghetto and of the exterminations in concentration camps, after asking him a series of increasingly specific questions like, what's the height of the wall that separates the ghetto from the rest of the city, Frankfurter paced the room in silence, then took his seat and said, "Mr. Karski, a man like me talking to a man like you must be totally frank. So I must say, I'm unable to believe what you told me." When Karski's colleague pleaded with Frankfurter to accept Karski's account, Frankfurter responded, "I didn't say that this young man is lying. I said that I am unable to believe him. My mind and my heart are made in such a way that I cannot accept it." Frankfurter didn't question the truthfulness of Karski's story. He didn't dispute that the Germans were systematically murdering the Jews of Europe, his own relatives, and he didn't respond that while he was persuaded and horrified, there was nothing he could do. Rather, he admitted not only his inability to believe the truth, but his awareness of that inability. Frankfurter was unable to wake up, understand, and perceive. Our minds and hearts are well built to perform certain tasks and poorly designed for others. We are good at things like calculating the path of a hurricane, and bad at things like deciding to get out of its way. We excel at taking care of ourselves and struggle to make the leaps of empathy required to take care of others. The further those others are, geographically, in time, and between species, the greater we struggle. Although many of climate change's accompanying calamities, like extreme weather events, floods and wildfires, displacement and resource scarcity, are vivid, personal, and suggestive of a worsening situation, they often don't feel that way in aggregate. They often feel abstract, distant, and isolated, rather than like beams of an ever-strengthening narrative. The Earth is telling us a story that we seem unable to believe. So-called climate change deniers reject the conclusion that science has reached. The planet is warming because of human activities. But what about those of us who say we accept the reality of human-caused climate change? We may not think the scientists are lying, but do we have the will to believe what they tell us? Such a belief would surely awaken us to the urgent ethical imperative attached to it, shake our collective conscience, and render us willing to make small and large sacrifices in the present to avoid cataclysmic ones in the future. Intellectually accepting the truth isn't virtuous in and of itself, and it won't save us. As a child, I was often told, "You know better," when I did something I shouldn't have done. Knowing was the difference between a mistake and an offense. If we factually accept that we are destroying the planet and dooming future generations, but are unable to believe it and change our behaviors in meaningful ways, we reveal ourselves to be just another kind of denier. And when the future distinguishes between those two kinds of denial, which will appear to be a grave error and which a sin? It's more comfortable to speak about the required changes before us in abstract terms, the kind that make us feel good when advertised on t-shirts or cheered in rallies, than in the practical ones that require us to alter our lives. Yes, there are constraints on how quickly and how much we can change. There are conventions and economic realities that limit the parameters of the possible. Yet we remain free to choose among possible options, and there are many within reach that could alter the trajectory of existence. The most influential decisions will be at the policy level, shaping the practices of nations, but we can also make decisions in our own lives and local institutions that matter more than the crude math might suggest. Choosing a form of transportation with lower carbon emissions, or reducing the consumption of animal products, especially meat, are actions that can matter at the individual and the policy level. The power of food system change to alter the climate is particularly noteworthy and only just beginning to be realized. We need structural change. We do. We need a global shift away from fossil fuels. We need to enforce something akin to a carbon tax, build walkable cities, and rapidly electrify homes and communities from increasingly renewable energy sources. We need to acknowledge the disproportionate obligations of countries like my own, America, that have been disproportionately responsible for climate change. We will likely need a political revolution. These changes will require shifts that individuals alone cannot realize. But putting aside the fact that collective revolutions are made up of individuals, led by individuals, and reinforced by individual revolutions, we would have no chance of achieving the goal of limiting environmental destruction if individuals don't make the very individual decision to live differently, to drive and fly less, to eat less meat, and to do the hard work of believing in both the catastrophe we are creating and our capacity to avert it. Of course it's true that one person's decisions will not change the world, but of course it's true that the sum of hundreds of millions of such decisions will. This is not to understate the challenge of changing one's own life. I've written 2 books about ethical eating and still regularly struggle to make choices that reflect my beliefs. It's now clear that this will be a lifelong struggle for me. I'm quite often in the position of having to make the decision about whether the carbon expense of a trip is worth it. These are the kinds of choices that each of us must face, and we won't arrive at the same answers. What's needed is not complete agreement, much less purity, but our belief expressed through our best and most thoughtful efforts. Also needed is hope. There's an understandable tendency among those who care to catastrophize. I often wrestle with despair in my own thinking about climate change. We need not despair, and we cannot despair. If we acknowledge in our hearts what our heads have already concluded about the struggle before us, the courage to change will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jonathan. The one point that I caught in your passionate submission is how your own country is making a disproportionate contribution per capita to emissions and therefore bears a big responsibility. And that is the kind of sentiment that all big countries should have. The bigger the country, the richer the country, the bigger the responsibility. Thank you very much. Friends, we'll now go to the next eminent speaker, Ms. Cécile Duflot. She is the Director General, Oxfam, France. As we all know, Oxfam is an international institution that cares deeply for both the planet and the people. She is deeply committed, politically committed to Europe's ecological transition. In 2012, she was Minister of Housing and Equality of the Territories, and between 2014 and 2016, she was Deputy to the National Assembly. So over to you, Ms. Duflot.
Bonjour à tous, merci beaucoup.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. I would like to respond to the title, or rather address the title of this roundtable, because it addresses 2 points in particular. Or on the one hand, we realize that for decades now, the scientists have been warning us for more than 10 years. The Paris Agreement has committed our entire planet in a scenario that should be at that should commit us to achieving certain results, and yet we're far from having received or achieved those goals. We here in Europe and elsewhere as well, in Africa and just about everywhere in the world, are quite aware of this reality. Now, what does the situation mean for us? Do we have to accept the fact that the ecological issue and that the ecological transition is no longer on the agenda? I think we need to be very clear as regards the difficulty of the struggle, because I think that there have been decades, dozens and dozens of roundtables and meetings to figure out what to do, mobilize players, acknowledging that we have to reckon with the fact that we've done a great deal, but pretty unsuccessfully. So how can we really frame the questions well? Now, we've probably understood that the human space is very strong when it comes to denying. Oftentimes, one tends to shut one's eyes and to look elsewhere. In the face of fundamental issues such as the possibility for our species to inhabit this planet, this denial is really discouraging. We have to admit the fact that this denial is there, and we must also admit that perhaps the idea of underscoring the need for the ecological transition as a commitment for the future generates problems for policymakers. The electoral, well, the fact that there are elections that are going to be taking place. This has a negative impact on the elections themselves. The first element which explains a great deal.
And the second has to do with short-term interests, especially financial interests. We're aware that the first and foremost responsibility of carbon emissions comes from our countries historically. And Mr. Kulkarni, you were right in recalling that, but at the same time, we're aware that the use of fossil energies is chiefly responsible for the more and more serious climate change. So above and beyond denial, there is also a financial and economic logic which is totally short-term and pushes people to cynicism. And I am happy that I am sitting in on this panel with you. Some say that there are responsibilities on the part of consumers and on the part of real economy. So those who produce pesticides and oil are but the consequences of demand on the market. So cynicism is a fact of life, and it may impact political decisions. Finally, and this is an element that might rock the boat, so to speak, all the more so that these panelists have these goals at heart. The consequence of the laissez-faire is to make our planet more and more fragile, as well as peace. What is peace? Peace is an issue of justice, fundamental justice, because the chief victims of climate change today, the populations of the Sahel area, where the famine has exploded, are the populations that are the least responsible for climate change. So there is a disproportion in terms of time. Two, the generations that will be impacted by the most devastating consequences of climate change hadn't been born when the emissions causing this phenomenon started to come to pass. So I think that the moment has come for us to raise the issue of how to respond to this climate emergency within a framework of justice. I take part in a number of fora and debates, and I must say that the many initiatives undertaken have proven that part of the countries of the south of the world have begun raising the same issues in these terms. So it's a matter of justice and not only of solidarity. The funds are no longer to be called solidarity funds, but damage repair funds. And also, ecological transition revolves around justice. Only this is the only way that we can address the issue in a rational manner. Otherwise, we'll be stuck at the level of great statements, noble-sounding statements, declarations, agreements, treaties, and the like. As in a trial, people, the law establishes who is expected to refund the damage done. We have done this in France by challenging the responsibilities of public authorities, and that followed tens and dozens of initiatives taken the world over against a number of various of different players. So we are emphasizing the role of justice in democracies. If we view this issue within the framework or through the prism of justice, perhaps we'll be in a better position to identify the means to redress the situation, because we are fully aware of what the challenges and the threats are, what the causes are. We know just what we would have to do in order to remedy. This is not at all like, the situations for instance, concerning those conflicts that we are now witnessing in the Middle East and in the Ukraine. When it comes to climate change, it's very simple. Unlike in those conflicts, you need to reduce fossil fuels, the use of fossil fuels, relaunch sobriety, and thriftiness. So the first question is, how can we actually and factually do that? And the theme here is political will. For now, we have to acknowledge that this political will is non-existent or not apparent, because many think that it's, it's the neighbor who must begin this, and then we will follow. Many people in France are reminding us that we represent 1% of emissions. If you go to everyone should play their role in this 1%. We need pioneers, and it's thanks to the recognition of the fact that some are forging ahead, that others took the first steps. So this plea, even in the absence of a global initiative that functions, is for us to forge ahead by ourselves. And I want to recall and remind you all that France has an interest and also holds a responsibility in starting this transition. This should be done in a timely manner, because we have been wasting time. At any rate, we are lucky enough that after the terrible pandemic, we have shown the world that we could actually move swiftly. Airplanes were grounded, traffic was reduced. No one would have thought this possible. People have little discipline, and hardly any people respect the existing rules. So I think it would be much easier to act in a more resolute and determined manner. And if the transition is not on the order of the day, on the agenda, at least there's bifurcation. In French, we say, you must. That means you have to do something. You are under a personal obligation, but there is also an impersonal obligation on the part of all of us on the planet to avoid the end of the inhabitability of our planet. And to do that, we need examples. And the example must come from the largest and most influential countries. But this cannot take place without justice. So I will conclude by saying that we need to look at the ecological transition within the framework or through the prism of justice. But this reminds us that our economic model, our development model, that causes deregulation, is the same model which is proving unable to resolve the issue of inequalities between the ultra-wealthy and the poor. And here I'm addressing French citizens. Even the Bank of France has said in so many words, that we need to reduce the inequality, the gap between the wealthiest and the poorest. So we need to adopt strong regulations to reduce greenhouse gases and at the same time to pursue the goals of social justice. Nobody is exempted from these efforts just because or by virtue of their wealth. Nobody is allowed to, obtain the privilege of polluting more than others. So we need to inject justice in our response to the climate crisis. And this is, in my way, the only way that will allow us to overcome this crisis. Normally, I'm not an optimist, but I am absolutely persuaded that all of this is possible. And maybe one day we'll turn back and say, we made it. Humankind has picked up this last challenge, the challenge of being smarter than ever, and has been able to remedy the past errors. This is a phenomenal challenge. It's truly a thrilling one, and I am sure that we might be able to win it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Duflot. All of us were truly inspired by what you said toward the end, that let's be optimistic and let's be able to say that we made it. Right now, the goal is still far away. The political will in most countries is non-existent or weak, but it's citizens' voice, citizens' action that is going to force our governments to take the right decisions and right actions. And it is in this context that discussions like ours are going to be extremely helpful. So thank you very much. Friends, we now move to our next speaker. Dr. Andries Olemaka. He is the church executive for the Lutheran World Federation in Germany, and he's stepping in for Bishop Kristina Schmidt, Vice President of the Lutheran World Federation. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you. Since I'm delivering a speech from someone else, I may take this stand. Bishop Kristina Kühnbaum-Schmidt is Bishop of the Lutheran State Church of Northern Germany, President of the National Committee of the World Lutheran Federation in Germany, and Vice President of LWF. Dear leaders and members of world religions, dear sisters and brothers, especially of Sant'Egidio, dear guests, imagine the bishop standing here. Her words: "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard." Words from Psalm 19. An abundance of imagery in the Bible proclaims and confesses God as creator. God is the creator of the world, its structures and boundaries, of human and non-human creatures. Christianity sees all human beings as God's creatures, interwoven in the community of creatures and the natural environment. From the very beginning, this has been described as a twofold responsibility as the image of God, towards God as creator and towards the creation. This perception of image of God implies a responsible way of action and handling of any habitat and its inhabitants. Experiencing the world as creation determines the perception of one's surroundings. It sensitizes for the multiple strains and dangers that threaten life. This is what prophets, psalms, and wisdom writings are about. Since the early 1970s, at the latest, humankind has realized that it has changed the climate, and that it continues to do so in a dramatic and decisive way. Ecological transformation is an increasingly widespread way of responding to this realization. This summer was once again the hottest in the world and also in Europe, since scientific climate observation began, quite sad, a record. Science has been telling us for decades, business as usual is not an option. At the same time, we know what happens in one part of the world has serious consequences worldwide. The key challenges we face are global challenges. They demand straightforward and rapid action. They require cooperation, not rivalry. Within our respective societies, as well as between religions and denominations, and beyond their boundaries, they require cooperation, not rivalry. The challenges brought about by the climate crisis can only be overcome together in a global community of responsibility. We do need an ethics of cooperation and trust, a global public spirit. Gatherings like the international meetings for peace organized by the Comunità di Sant'Egidio are an important instrument. Thank you very much for this. They transcend the boundaries of nations and religions and thus promote a global public spirit, because they make a contribution to trust and cooperation so urgently needed. The country I come from more and more faces up to its contribution and it's part of the responsibility for the climate crisis. Germany is trying to facilitate an ecological transformation. Some consider this socio-ecological transformation to be futile, declaring that the measures we have taken have no effect at all. They do not see or ignore how much is being ventured in other religions of the world against the climate crisis. As Commissioner of Creation Issues of the evangelical churches in Germany, I represent about a quarter of our population. I do see that Germany, Europe, and the Western world still have much to do and to change. At the same time, it is encouraging to see that the ecological transformation is an accepted and shared issue from local congregation to Germany's regional state churches. Pastors and all those working in various professions in churches promote this theme in cities and boroughs, towns and villages and homesteads in the remotest corners of our country. Each regional state church in Germany has a climate law or is working on one. Together, the Protestant churches in Germany have agreed to reach 90% carbon neutrality by 2035 and 100% in 2045. Being Christians, we know of our human responsibility. It is drawn mainly from the biblical description of human beings as an image of God. We are well aware of the wrong ways that have been followed. For centuries, Christian theology had declared man the crown of creation, then laying claim to rule over the whole non-human world. Exploitation and contempt, rather than a caring and respectful sense of responsibility, had stemmed from this widespread theology. In recent decades, to the contrary, Christian churches have learned a lot about an attitude towards life based on fellow creaturehood, mindfulness, respect and appreciation for the non-human creation. Much of this has been learned in interreligious dialogues. Developing an ecological spirituality and an eco-theology is part of this learning process. As institutions, Christian churches put the ecological transformation into effect by using their legal and economical capacities. Leaseholds and tenures are allocated according to ecological criteria since the 1980s, and these criteria have been extended year by year. Buildings are being restructured, renovated, and energetically improved. Photovoltaics and various other technical means are being used. Could we not start joint campaigns for such measures, together with those in charge of religious buildings, premises, and real estates of other religions? I serve as vice president of a global Christian community representing 151 churches in 99 countries, the Lutheran World Federation. The path from boroughs, villages, and household to large conferences and back does exist here as well, embracing a perspective on the practical and often dramatic problems the climate crisis has already raised. Our community in the Lutheran World Federation is concerned with those suffering from the climate crisis and lacking the resources for an ecological transformation. Here, catastrophes such as droughts or floods cause widespread suffering and often intensify social injustice. Poor people in need of water or literally in deep water. Children deprived of any chance for their future because even the essentials are lacking. Indigenous peoples being threatened in their very existence because their land has been taken. The list could go on much too long. The Lutheran World Federation turned its attention to ecological transformation at an early stage, both practically and theologically. This intention has increased since 1977, when the LWF General Assembly took up aspects of the ecological transformation on its agenda. By 2002, at the latest, the LWF had finally reached the turning point from the rather painful readiness to make sacrifices for the environment to an active, positively perceived commitment to ecological transformation. LWF strategy until this year did focus on ecological transformation. Eco-theological research was carried out. Numerous projects in member churches and partner churches were dedicated to aspects of ecological transformation, especially projects by young adults and women. Both perspectives were taken, the perspective of those who cause most of the damage and do have to change, and the perspective of those who are affected by climate change, whose damage needs to be mitigated, and where better ways to the future have to be found and dare to go. Churches both stand in solidarity and cooperate with other religions, the United Nations, various NGOs, and governmental agencies. This year, a new LWF strategy has been enacted with respect to ecological transformation. It is a continuation of this journey, sharing hope, empowering churches, impacting the world. This motto describes the journey from hope to empowerment and thus to impacting with respect to ecological transformation, influencing the world. We outline how churches and religions can be actively influential. They do have spiritual and other resources at their disposition. They can share strengths and ideas. They can pass them on, and they can gain impact. While each church and community adapts its actions to its own context, the aim is still the same: to approach the climate crisis and to stand up for climate justice. I really respect with the highest esteem everyone who is working for ecological transformation, who is leading or following the path away from a consumptive use of nature towards a sustainable, healing, renewing interaction with it. It is the issue of humankind. About 80% of humankind worldwide are religious in one or the other way. The vast majority of religions does understand human beings as beings in relationship with other beings, human beings, with other animated beings, with nature, with the numinous, with God. Religions regard human beings as creatures who do not owe their lives to themselves, but who have their lives as a gift and a donation. Creatures surrounded by and connected to co-creatures for whom they are responsible. Thus, religions are crucial partners in addressing the challenges of the man-made climate crisis. For the churches in Germany, I may say we are taking part in the socio-ecological transformation, and we are working for it in our international cooperations. My home regional state Church of Northern Germany has, among other initiatives, installed climate twins from Germany and Tanzania. People from both regions work on joint climate-related projects, share their experiences, support each other, and find solutions based on their respective knowledge. This strengthens the bonds between people and provides practical support. We realize God places us in relationship with our fellow creatures, gives us gifts for our work, and has entrusted us with responsibility. This perception is a powerful source of strength. Yes, we are committed to bringing about ecological transformation. We do like to cooperate with those who are engaged in the same work, NGOs, other confessions, other religions. We ask those outside religions, do use and accept the willingness and the helpful resources of the world's religions. Every year, the Christian churches celebrate a season of creation from September the 1st, the first day of the Orthodox Church's calendar, to October the 4th. The initiative came from the Orthodox churches. September the 1st is also the feast day of St. Francis, the patron saint of animals and nature in the Roman Catholic tradition. Especially from this day on, churches worldwide call to celebrate God's creative power, to interact regardfully with creation, and to find and apply good practices. They refer to both prayer and to action. Especially in these weeks of the season of creation, people bring before God what is fearful and what is hopeful about the ecological crisis. In this way, confidence becomes visible, confidence that God's creative power enables change towards a life worth living for all creatures. Let all the trees of the forest sing for joy. Psalm 96. In Germany, this is the theme of the nationwide ecumenical service for a day of creation on September the 6th. For me, the trees of the forest singing for joy is an image of hope. I am inspired to be on a journey with so many people, on a journey towards greater climate protection and climate justice, towards a life worth living in God's marvelous creation in communion with all creatures. That's the speech of Bishop Kristina Kühnbaum-Schmidt.
Thank you, Dr. Andres Olemaka. You know, as an Indian, as a non-European, I can tell you that people in my country who are concerned about the climate crisis are inspired by what your country, Germany, and many other countries in Europe have been doing. Of course, you rightly said that you have a long way to go. All of us have a long way to go. But if there is one continent where climate awareness is the highest, it is Europe. And we are really heartened by this. You use the word climate transformation, not just ecological transition, but ecological transformation. And that makes our mandate even more pressing, even more comprehensive, because so much damage has been done and it takes a lot, not just to do the transition from point A to point B, but to actually effect a comprehensive socio-ecological transformation. Thank you very much. Friends, we now move to our next distinguished speaker, Dr. Gaël Giraud, economist from France. He's a French Jesuit and economist. He works at Georgetown University in Washington, where he teaches economics and directs the environmental justice program. which he himself founded. A fellow of the International Energy Agency, he is director of research at CNR Paris, where he also teaches political theology. He worked as an economic consultant at the Agence Française de Développement, and has published important studies on ecological transition. Over to you, Dr. Gaël, Giraud.
Thank you. So I worked as chief economist of the French Development Bank, which is what you wanted to say. Thank you. So it seems to me over the past 2 years, something has changed in our relationship with ecological shift, transformation, transition, however you want to call it. When we emerged from the confinements imposed by COVID-19, many hoped that the international community would learn the lessons from the pandemic and finally agree to confront the gigantic ecological challenges we face. So global warming, all this is supposed to be well known, so I'm not entering into the details. Lack of drinkable water, collapse of biodiversity, plastic pollution, etc., etc. And so, as Cécile Duflot rightly said, after the pandemic, we should have had the impetus to start something. Remember, in January 2022, the financial elite jostled to listen to Mrs. Greta Thunberg in Davos. Since then, however, the necessary transition seems to have completely disappeared from political agendas, at least in the West. The political parties supposedly promoting ecology are recording the worst electoral defeats in decades. The media have relegated the ongoing ecological catastrophe to the rank of secondary subjects, and even the United Nations is struggling to build a coalition around the fight against food insecurity. Does this mean that the ecological shift has lost its relevance? Clearly not. The physical fundamentals of global warming, the disruption of the water cycle, the ongoing destruction of our natural ecosystems have only worsened in the past 2 years. So what happened? Of course, there was the invasion of Ukraine, which plunged the international community into the immediacy of war. Now there is the conflict in the Middle East, grabbing the headlines. But I don't think that fear for immediate violence is enough to explain why, at a time when climatic disasters are multiplying in Europe in particular, the West seems to have taken a step backwards on the ecological front. I believe that one factor has gone largely unnoticed and yet is playing a decisive role, namely the following. At the end of 2022, most reinsurance companies in the West withdrew from the risk induced by extreme climate events, floods, droughts, hurricanes. These very disastrous events that are set to multiply or increase in severity due to global warming. Therefore, for almost 2 years now, most insurance companies have found themselves on their own when it comes to insuring against the damages caused by these climate events. And the impact of these damages on the insurance profession is massive. As this slide shows here, annual losses induced by extreme weather events in the US have exceeded $50 billion since 2016 every year, and they are approaching $200 billion since 2021. If no action is taken, what is in store, therefore, is for all reinsurers and then insurers themselves to withdraw from insuring risks associated with extreme weather events. What then? One of two things may happen. Either the state steps in as a kind of insurer of last resort, or it gives up saving its citizens from the next disaster, similar to the floods currently ravaging Eastern Europe. The difficulty, of course, is that the public finances of many states seem too fragile to afford losses in the tens of billions every time a hurricane or a drought hits their territory. But if the state itself pulls out, the private banking sector will soon follow suit, because the territory which is no longer insured is non-bankable. And a territory which is not bankable is a territory where nothing can happen, economically speaking. This could mean large abandoned territories, even in Europe, and unprecedented migrations, including inside countries in the north. Has this prospect, which is, I confess, very frightening, convinced some investors and asset management firms that it's now too late to invest in green? I'm wondering. Last year, well-known financiers such as Allianz in Germany, Vanguard in the US, withdrew from the environmental organizations they once financed. At the same time, JP Morgan redefined its investment criteria, significantly relaxing its environmental requirements. The well-known Inclusive Capital Fund, headed by activist Jeff Ubben, which set out to invest in environmentally unfriendly groups in order to change them from within, announced at the end of 2023 that it was giving up and would repay the $2.3 billion it had raised from its clients. Finally, by 2022, 6 other funds, big funds, had dropped all references to environmental and social standards and decided to move towards much more conventional investments. Of course, there are exceptions. Fortunately, the Dutch bank Triodos or the French fund HI24 are some of them. Nonetheless, I think it's fair to say that for 1 year now, the financial sphere is moving backward on the climate front. Is it possible that this regression has convinced the media and the political class to abandon the topic of the ecological transition? I'm also just wondering. Of course, now, today, the inflation we have been experiencing for the past 2 years doesn't encourage people to turn to green again. On the contrary, inflation is encouraging the major central banks, including the Fed in the US, the ECB in Europe, to raise their leading interest rates, making investment more expensive and green projects even less attractive than before. Finally, geopolitical tensions, be it in Ukraine, in Africa, in the Middle East, have convinced some asset managers that the urgent need now is no longer to invest or to go green, but to finance the defense sector, particularly in the US, where the arms industry is running at full capacity to fuel Ukrainian resistance. Now the question, I think, would be, can we break this deadlock and put the ecological transition or transformation back at the top of our list of priorities? To imagine a way out to the top, we must, I believe, take into account the following elements. First, global inflation does not stem from an excess of monetary liquidity on the planet. In particular, it is not the result of central banks' quantitative easing policies. These non-conventional monetary policies, which were necessary to save the banking system from the 2008 crisis, these policies have fueled the financial and the real estate asset bubbles, but only marginally domestic inflation. Domestic inflation, as we know it in Europe, for instance, but not just also in Europe, comes primarily from the bottlenecks in the global supply of fossil fuels and commodities, and from the dependence of major economies on fossil fuels. Therefore, if I'm right, the best way to fight against inflation, in the West especially, is not to raise interest rates at the risk of preventing investment and triggering another financial crash, but to promote autonomy from fossil fuels by financing the transition towards renewable energies. Is this feasible? Well, the Rousseau Institute, which is a French think tank, has provided a net zero decarbonization pathway for the European Union that would cost only, quote unquote, 2.3% of the EU GDP each year between now and 2050. South Africa has done the same kind of exercise and obtains a similar figure for the cost of transition. It would be undoubtedly much more costly for other countries, but I think it's wrong to claim that it's impossible to implement the ecological transition today. Of course, many of my colleagues, economists, will ask, how about the public debt? Public debt, I think, is not a real obstacle, despite Europe's obsession for fiscal austerity. Let me just give you an example. A debt for climate swap can be set up. What is this? It's a mechanism, a device which says, well, the creditors are going to give a part of your debt provided you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. So you become virtuous, and for that, we are going to award you with the fact that we give up part of your debt. Is this crazy? No, it's not. The World Bank did it on a massive scale 20 years ago. Pretoria in South Africa is currently negotiating such a scheme for its public debt. The Eurozone could do the same with the central bank, the ECB, which is the creditor of several hundred billion of European public debt. This would in no way call into question the functioning of the euro, since as the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, which is the central bank of central banks, has reminded us, a central bank like the ECB or the Fed or the Bank of England for that purpose can operate perfectly without equity capital, or even with negative equity capital. So we could organize a debt for climate swap between the ECB and the states of the Eurozone today. Fourth, the Mario Draghi report makes it clear, I believe, that for a continent like Europe, investment is now a matter of survival. Do you think that Draghi is unaware of fiscal constraints? I don't think so. His suggestion to rely on European debt, namely Eurobonds, makes perfectly sense, provided, I think, it is repaid with tax receipts coming, let's say, from a carbon tax at the frontiers of Europe. Fifth, and finally, I believe if we want to prevent tomorrow's wars, we need to free old industries from their dependence on minerals, which are becoming critical, especially on copper. For it is for the grabbing of these critical minerals that we risk seeing the emergence of new conflicts. The invention of a low-tech industry that saves and recycles energy, water, and minerals is, I believe, one of the keys toward peace. And this applies just as much to China as to the deindustrializing West. These, I believe, are all the reasons why the ecological transition today is more topical than ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giraud.
Molte grazie, dottor Giraud. È stato veramente un intervento estremamente.
It dispelled many myths. You know, you spoke about how insurance is less and less interested in taking care of those who are vulnerable in Europe, but think of the vulnerable in the least developed countries. 44 of them in the global south. They have absolutely no insurance. Who takes care of them? And it's truly frightening to know that investors are now moving from investing in green economy to arms economy, as you said. But I particularly liked your last suggestion that the whole world needs to move away from this obsession with critical rare earth minerals, which are a cause of conflicts. And can we therefore, as part of ecological transition, move to what you said, low-tech development, circular economy, reuse economy, which is peace promoting. Very interesting ideas. Thank you very much. You are an economist who marries economy to ecology. Thank you very much. And morality. Thank you very much. Friends, we now move to Mr. Aurélien Hamelle. He's Director General of Strategy, Sustainability at Total Energies, France. And it's good to have a representative from an energy company. He has been Executive Vice President, Strategy, Sustainability, and a member of the Executive Committee of Total as a lawyer specializing in company law, as Managing Director, Strategy, Sustainability. He oversees several of the company's divisions. He has been a lecturer in law and governance at various institutions. Over to you. Over to you, Mr. Hamelle.
Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous. Je vais repasser en français.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to speak in French. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to speak. Let me tell you what I mean. If you look out the window, there's a beautiful church. If you haven't just visited it yet, you should do so. This is where I was baptized as an adult at the age of 20. 15 minutes before coming here, I went to visit the church, and it brought back some very important moments in my life. I read some sheets, some papers in the parish, and I noticed that there was an announcement. Next Sunday, there will be a conference on the end of ecology, featuring Fabrice Adjacha, who has written a paper, Tragic Ecology, and the ecological challenge that stands before us between the generalized museumization, and anyway, we need to look for a greater opportunity towards life. This way of addressing the ecological channel is a tension between the forces of good and evil. It's a very pertinent approach. It's pertinent and relevant for me because, you see, when you work in an energy company, the issue of energy, the matter of energy, of course, it touches us as individuals. It affects us individually, but also professionally. So the reflection on this theme is constant, is ongoing, and it's something that is very relevant to me and to my colleagues as well. Well, we've talked about the energy transition and the ecological transition. It was already stated, the world of energy today is represented by 80% by fossil fuels, carbon, oil, gas. There's a very close bond, a connection between energy and development still today. Let me just share with you some figures. Not too many, just a few. We have talked about the role of the most advanced countries and the role of less developed countries, and there is a close correlation between primary energy per capita and the level of human development. I'll give you an example. On a curve, we have African countries that are at the bottom of the bell curve. In terms of human development, they range somewhere between 0.5 or 10, and needs for primary energy, 2.5 megawatts per person in Europe. We're between 0.8 and 0.95 and between 2.40 megawatts per person in terms of consumed energy.
And I'm talking about human development on this planet. So this is my starting point, but it can't be our arrival point because the ecological transitions remains on the agenda, and when we examine the issue, we need to examine it by segments of energy. A few, some data: we emit 55 billion tons of CO2 per year. Energy represents 44 billion tons. And power represents 80 billion tons of CO2 per year, 62% of which is generated by coal, So coal was used to generate energy. Renewable energies do not produce any CO2, any carbon dioxide. 9 billion tons of CO2 derive from transportation, maritime, road, and oil is at the origin of these emissions. 6 billion tons due to manufacturing between coal and oil. So look at these realities and you will start getting an idea of how to deal with the ecological transition in concrete terms. And whoever is interested in this, since the link is very strong between human development and energy, do take a look at this situation in a differentiated manner. One final word concerning what has been going on in the past 10 years. Before we deal with the topic at hand, whether this is still on the agenda. By nature, I'm an optimist, but I still try not to be swept away by my natural optimism, because I know that the situation does not invite one to be optimistic. This past weekend, I have been observing the energy scenarios it's a source which analyzes the current energy policies of the various countries, and it looks at this all the way to 2030 or even 2050. In view of the end of the century, they're expecting heating by 7 degrees. 2 degrees is the Paris Agreement's maximum goal. Last year, there was talk of 2.4 degrees by the end of the centuries based upon an advanced energy mix using less coal, that is. Concerning transportation, no major changes have taken place. 0.3 degrees is the expected progress in 6 or 7 years. It is not enough, but we're talking about 420 billion tons of CO2 between the two forecasts. So we'll be saving 0.3 degrees if things have not worked out, and if the planet, mankind, the economy are not on this trajectory of the Paris Agreement. However, we must say that some things did work. Having said that, we must realize that the world's been changing, especially in the past few years. I now see major hindrance to ecological transition, which is, in particular, disagreement, discord. I like this simple word because I think it's very accurate. Disagreement manifests itself in conflicts, first and foremost in wars. I am thinking of the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East, but also the conflicts are on the rise a little bit everywhere. In 2022, the inflation was ignited and it has impacted the most important products, and the crisis led the price of gas to increase. Most countries that were now unable to purchase gas from Russia, they went back to using coal in order to produce and generate energy. One of the stakes of this disagreement lies with the inability to find, or of the inability of finding a new agreement, lies with war, which is a hindrance for ecological transition, as it pushes states to withdraw in sort of energy sovereignty. Coal is the most sovereign energy. It is found in the underground of many, many countries, and many countries are investing in coal to protect and defend their own sovereignty with, acceptably stable prices. So our problem with this increased conflicts is that states are going the sovereign way and lack the confidence which would enable us to move on to coal-free energy. The second stage doesn't have to do with international relations so much as domestic conditions. We are observing a very strong polarization in the public debate on ecological and energy transition. The issue, for instance, in the United States, has turned into a political issue, which is disastrous because energy and energy and ecological transitions shouldn't be politicized, and yet it's taken hostage by conservatives, which is disastrous for it. This shouldn't be the case. It should be a bipartisan choice somehow. The issue should find political consensus and agreement over and above and beyond the electoral oppositions, but this radicalization of the discussion is part and parcel of the discussion itself, though it's a reality in the discussions taking place within civil society. Francis Hajjaj speaks of a radicality that enters into the social debate, and I'm so glad that I'm taking part in this forum and to be able to contribute to this discussion, as I believe that we should exclude this radicality from our discussions in order to find agreement. This agreement exists at the multilateral level, but also in the party conferences, the Paris conference and Dubai conference. Parties' conferences are a ground of agreement for large powers, and there is a ground of understanding between China and the United States, which at the end of the COP in Dubai did achieve a form of agreement. It was the case in Glasgow and in Paris as well, where the United States and China agreed to find a solution in view of the COP in Baku. Many countries, in particular China, are working with others to reduce greenhouse gases. So something is indeed going on. What is important is that this targeted diplomacy persists in spite of the doom and gloom represented by world conflicts. Another element is represented by multilateralism, which in this day and age is still functioning. We see Asian initiatives or initiatives in the Middle East, initiatives to advance the ecological transition. Another dimension are the actions by individual countries. There are initiatives underway, and I will mention a couple, to advance the ecological transition. For instance, at the co-op in Dubai, we saw an initiative by GDC to decarbonize manufacturing. The initiative brings together 52 companies, including a few state-owned companies, which is important to succeed to achieve the transition concerning coal and gas.
5% de la production et des réserves mondiales. Une entreprise comme Total Energy, qui est une grande entreprise,
And a company such as my company, Total Énergies, represents 1.5% of the oil and gas output. But unless we get everyone else involved, we will never achieve anything which may, in fact, change the direction we're going.
tendre vers zéro. Les émissions de méthane, je le dis pour les non-initiés, le méthane, c'est la priorité à court terme de
Methane is the priority for our company, Total Énergies. This is a gas which does warm the atmosphere over 20 years, 80 times more than carbon dioxide. So we need to intervene in methane in order to achieve important results. Methane is a gas which is dispersed in the atmosphere.
Ça, c'est le méthane énergétique. Il y a le méthane qui est en agriculture, on le sait, qui représente à peu près le même ordre de grandeur tous les deux.
Methane is used in agriculture.
Source de méthane sur Terre. Ça, c'est une priorité. Donc, on a réuni
Methane is obtained from waste. So this is a priority. Those companies which are leading in this sector should deal with this, should form coalitions
et les consommateurs.
in order to involve all of the energy sectors, but also consumers, transportation, and its users. So we're taking part in a number of efforts, and we're part of groups involving producers, manufacturers, and we're working in a very practical way. Sometimes these endeavors are conducted far from the eyes of the media, and this is a precondition for progress. But there are more initiatives by companies and manufacturers to help individual behaviors evolve. I will not go into the details. We could discuss this at a later time. These initiatives start from the international community, but concern individuals too. Let me please now conclude my remarks with a quote. That's my favorite Beatitudes. Blessed are the makers of peace, for heaven belongs to them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, sorry. As I said in introducing to you, it's good to have a person from an energy company participating in this discussion. You made two important points. First, that you said that war is a hindrance to ecological transition, and you gave the example of how the war in Ukraine is making some countries go back to coal, which is a major emitter. So war has disastrous consequences, many, but including a disastrous consequence for the ecology. Second, right now in the United States, there are politicians in the presidential campaign who altogether dismiss ecological transition, the need for it. Very concerning. So thank you very much, Mr. Hamelle. Now we have two more speakers. We now move on to Ms. Isabelle Rosabrunetto, Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, Principality of Monaco. After working for many years at the Principality's Ministry of Treasury, she is now Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation. She is very committed to issues critical to our time, such as quest for peace, sustainable development, protection of the rights of the most vulnerable, and the reception and integration of migrants. Thank you. Welcome.
Bien, bonsoir à tous. Merci à Sant'Egidio pour cette invitation annuelle à laquelle je participe toujours avec grand plaisir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation. I always really like to participate. The issue of ecological transition, as everybody has underscored, is crucial. It cannot be disregarded. The Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, we're in the forefront every day to observe crises, conflicts, humanitarian catastrophes associated with climate change. In the face of this disaster, we may wonder why we're not moving at the same speed and in the same direction. But often my staff tells me that, the people that we deal with on a day-to-day basis don't know whether they'll make it to the end of the month, let alone the end of the day. The Archbishop of Canterbury yesterday said, how can we address the climate change, and how can we talk about that with the people who fight on the front in Ukraine? So it's very difficult to cast a stone against some, because some are fighting for their own survival. And for them, the ecological transition cannot be a priority. As far as governments are concerned, it would be a terrible mistake to defer the environmental challenge. The real need is to reconcile the short-term and long-term challenges and needs. The points of agreement are difficult, and needs in the short term tend to prevail for various reasons. What I can say is that in Monaco, thanks to the stability of our institutions, it is possible for us to act in the long term. I would like to share with you the approach that we have adopted at the international level and on our territory, which will not change the face of the world, because we're very limited and very small territory. But we could say the opposite, really. We're very small, so what's the point of an ecological transition? But we don't think that since we're small, we shouldn't do anything. We actually do a great deal. Now, as you might know, we have the GH reports, the experts who tell us that climate change raises the risk for conflict, and that, of course, these conflicts increase the vulnerability of populations in relation to climate change. Now, we may deduce that a vicious cycle is instated that heralds an obscure future. It is absolutely essential, therefore, for us to act rapidly so that the ecological transition may become a reality. Now, some say that nationalism is not enjoying good health, but there are many opportunities to debate and to carry forward the topic of ecological transition on the international level. I'd like to quote an example that I found out about recently, because, as our moderator said, in the past I worked for the Treasury. Now, as you know, the International Agency for Atomic Energy, which it has many programs, peace programs in place, which are called Peace for Use Initiative, that works especially in collaboration with FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, to reduce the losses in food produced and to improve the quality, especially in terms of resistance to drought. Now, many things are being done here at the multilateral level, and there are also some conferences that have made it possible to make progress. Global framework program for diversity has been established. It's called the Kunming-Montreal Framework, the purpose of which is to promote an effective management of at least 30% of lands and oceans worldwide by 2030. You may also know that underway are intense negotiations and talks to reduce pollution from plastic material. Mr. Giraud has proven that plastics have become really a threat. So it's a matter of reducing the production of plastic, to reduce it with other materials, so as to manage waste in such a way to avoid them ending up in our oceans and the fish we eat in our body and so on. You know what the cycle is. So we started from biodiversity, so we cannot disregard this topic.
Someone has quoted the COP29 to be held next November in Baku in view for a new global climate funding goal from the developed country to a developing country. As Mrs. Duflot recalled, party states to the agreement should come up with a new national goal for the reduction of greenhouse gases for the period 2025 through 2035. So here are the international goals that are necessary in order to establish a multinational framework. Even if this may appear distant or ineffective, all of this is still necessary for the world order. So what have we done in Monaco? We have adopted a number of measures. Just because we're small, it's not that we're not doing anything. So what are greenhouse gases? 1/3 of that is due to our waste. So by 2030, we have established a goal. We have adopted a zero plastic waste goal. We have the government has adopted provisions to drastically reduce the use of plastic, especially single-use plastic. We are now replacing plastic with a system of glass containers that we hand out. Remember, we usually throw out containers, but the plastic ones may be replaced by glass ones and will then be collected by a company that cleans them out and recycles them. We do what we can. We have beefed up our awareness-raising campaigns, and fortunately, at the Principality of Monaco, there is no such thing as radicalization between the pros and those who are in favor and those who are against. There's a certain degree of consensus on the fact that we need to go ahead and try the best we can. Another factor which produces greenhouse gases is construction, the construction industry. We have banned the use of diesel fuels. We're investing a great deal into solar panels and insulating public building. Also, we have been adopting a new and innovative approach that we called thalassothermy. Thermy is a system of pumps transforming the marine energy to fuel the heating and the air conditioning in buildings, and helps reduce remarkably our consumption of fossil fuels. Finally, there's mobility as everywhere. Transportation, although our surface is only 2.5 square kilometers, when I talk about when we talk about transportation in connection with Monaco, people think of Porsche or Ferrari and F1, but that's only a marginal phenomenon. The Principality is placing its stakes upon sustainable transportation, such as self-service electric bikes. We have been funding railway convoys to increase the frequencies of the convoys that come across the chief railway station. Our ministers walk around instead of using chauffeured cars. So we try to act and provide an example. Internationally, this Principality is also intensifying its efforts. We are the first per capita donor to the Climate Fund, a very important fund established by the UN to help the most vulnerable nations to reduce greenhouse emissions and to adapt to climate impacts. Monaco has also tried to mobilize a growing number of players, which is not always easy. And at any rate, we are trying to act as a driver of the locomotive that pulls other countries. And it has been said, for the private sector, there are coalitions and alliances with entities sharing the same interests. For instance, the High Ambition Coalition for Climate, which played a crucial role at the COP21 in Paris. The same coalition is now promising the end of the use of fossil energies. A little progress was observed in COP Dubai. And we've also established a fund for losses and damages. We're also part of other coalitions which are spearheading multilateralism. For instance, the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, that has to do with biodiversity. It's an intergovernmental group that gathers 119 countries, a very good sign indeed, aiming at implementing the global goal of Kunming and Montreal by 2030. We've also signed the High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution, and these are our commitments at the international levels. I think that this proves that the ecological transition is still right at the center of the multilateral and national agendas. Of course, we're all aware that progress is way too slow, and that the time has come to consider that the efforts represent also an investment, whereas the cost of inertia will exceed whatever efforts we may undertake today. And we must undertake efforts today if we are to change our lifestyles and production styles. So I will not conclude with a psalm. Rather, I'll quote Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, when he said that peace in our world hinges upon peace with our planet, and this demands that governments overcome geopolitical divisions and work for the common good by creating a climate of peace in all its dimensions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Rosabrunetto. You come from a small principality, but with a big commitment to climate action. And the small initiatives that you mentioned, if all countries adopt them, they go a long way. be it marine energy for running air conditioners, small initiatives, but they mean a lot. Thank you very much. Friends, we now come to the last speaker in this panel from the beautiful country of Japan, Mr. Moriyasu Ito. He's a Shintoist. He officiates at the Meiji Jingu shrine in Tokyo, built in the early 1900s in honor of the Emperor and Empress Meiji. And he represents Shinto religion, as most of you know, 2,500 years old, with a very rich philosophy rooted in man-nature harmony. Over to you, Mr. Moriyasu Ito.
Thank you for your introduction. So it is my privilege to make a presentation here on this occasion. So I am the last speaker. Okay, as other speakers indicated, ecological transition refers to a gradual shift from a society dependent on fossil fuels to one based on renewable and sustainable energy resources. Climate change is having a significant impact on life on the planet. In Japan, summer heat has become hotter in recent years than in the past. And yesterday too, really heavy rain caused major damage as flooding of rivers and landslidings in Ishikawa prefectures. It is clear that we, especially the energy-consuming countries, must have considered social life and energy policies that reduce carbon dioxide emissions. As I'm not an expert in this field, I do not have specific knowledge, scientific knowledge, accurate statistics or information, nor do I have the ability to analyze and implement them as policy. I pray that the situation will improve as soon as possible. If this discussion and policy are not progressing well, it is probably because the egos of individuals and nations are at play. If people think, I can use energy as much as I want, since the amount of my individual use of energy is very small, or our country does not have to be the one disadvantaged by reducing energy consumption, this problem will be difficult to solve. It is necessary for each individual to be aware of his or her connection to the earth and to make efforts to solve the problem without postponing the burden for the future generations on the earth. As a Shinto priest, I would like to think how Shintoism, one of Japan's indigenous religion, with its more than 2,500 years of history, can be involved in this issue. Shinto has no founder, no holy scriptures like the Bible or Qurans, and no clear doctrines or precepts. Shinto is a way of life itself that was formed in the rich natural environment of Japan. Its core concept is gratitude to nature and respect for life to be passed on, as can be seen from the myth compiled in the 8th century. Shinto shrines are usually surrounded by many trees, and Meiji Jingu Shinto Shrine, where I serve, has 70 hectares forest in the middle of Tokyo. Here in this naturally renewing forest, we are able to see the elements that are ecological and sustainable. Many religions have a deity or God who is the only absolute and supreme being, or a being that is separates from human beings. The concept of God of the so-called monotheistic religions is quite different from the gods in Shinto. So let me use the Japanese word kami in Shinto context. In Shinto, there are many kami. For example, the kami of the sun, kami of the sea, kami of the mountains, and so on. Since Japan is rich in nature, our ancestors living in Japan have felt that they are surrounded by countless kami and can live thanks to their blessings. Therefore, from time to time, we put our palms together in gratitude to nature. We do not assume and worship kami of the sea, for example, like Poseidon in Greek mythology or Neptune in Roman mythology, but we are thankful for the ocean itself as divine existence, divine nature. We are grateful for the mountains and fields that bring us crops, for the rain and river water. Even we find kami in the compost. So this is how we live our lives, feeling that we are alive as part of nature. Therefore, we are subconsciously aware that to destroy the ecosystem is to destroy our own lives. However, I don't think this is a feeling unique to only the Japanese. In Dan Brown's novel, the American novelist, Angels and Demons, there is a phrase that goes like this. It's quote, "The planet is an organism. All of us are cells with different purposes, yet we are intertwined, serving each other, serving the whole." So if we are aware of the fact that we are living as part of a greater harmony, and that our consumption of energy affects others and the earth, we will be able to curb excessive and wasteful energy consumption activities. In Japan, there is a Japanese word, mottainai. Wangari Maathai, Kenyan environment activist who got a Nobel Prize in 2004, liked this idea and then launched a campaign to promote this idea of mottainai all over the world for protecting the environment. And the word mottainai is used to warn against waste. For example, it is mottainai if you leave the light on, or it is mottainai if you throw something away when it is still usable. But it is more about respect and care for all things than a warning. Even a grain of rice contains kami of rice. So we must take good care of it and feel sorry if we waste it. Another meaning of mottainai is thankfulness or awe, which I think expresses a feeling of respect for the object. Thus, giving thanks for being alive in the blessings of all things is something that is highly valued in Shinto. Japan frequently faces difficulties due to severe natural phenomena such as earthquakes, typhoons, and tsunamis. In this nature, which is beyond human control, we should have a sense of humility to be grateful to be part of it. And this feeling is fading from the Japanese people. I believe that we, Shinto priests, must strive to restore it. The life of trees, the life of nature, and the life of human beings are all connected. Thus, we should firmly commit ourselves to do what each one of us can do and to pass on to the next generation the abundant nature and precious life that we have inherited from our ancestors. I believe that we are living in an era in which it is necessary not only to implement major social measures and regulations, but also to make changes in our individual ways of thinking on a global scale. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Priest Ito. It was so very meaningful to have you as the last speaker, because you brought a sense of the sacred to this discussion. If we lose the sense of the sacred, if we lose the sense of divinity, all discussion, all action on ecological transition is going to be incomplete. You said that if we destroy the ecosystem, we destroy ourselves, because all life is interconnected. While listening to you, Mr. Ito, I was reminded of what Mahatma Gandhi said about the interconnectedness of life, especially our responsibility, our duty towards other creatures of Mother Nature. He says, it is an arrogant assumption to say that human beings are lords and masters of the lower creatures. On the contrary, being endowed with the greater faculties of life, we human beings are the trustees, caretakers of the lower animal and plant kingdom. So it is only with this awareness of our broader responsibility to everything in nature, everything created by God Almighty, that we can succeed in this huge task of ecological transition and transformation. Friends, before I move to the question answers, I must bring to this discussion something important which somehow didn't come into our discussion. I am from India, and one of the things that I do in my own small ways is to try and promote better relations between our neighbor, China. And I do think that in this discussion, we all should know what China is doing for ecological transition, for moving away from fossil fuels. I've been to China many, many times, and I've seen it with my own eyes. China is building today 2/3 of the world's wind and solar projects. By the end of this year, China will have 40% of total installed power generation coming from solar and wind and other renewables. It manufactures 80% of solar panels, which means it is actually helping others make the transition. Of course, it has other implications. It is also the largest producer of EVs. Now, I know that there are many aspects of China which are detestable, which are questionable, but we should recognize where recognition is due. And I strongly urge the community of Sant'Egidio that in all these discussions, we should have, just as you have representatives from India, you should have representatives from the other big nation, China. Thank you very much. Now, friends, we move to questions. These are questions that have come from members of the audience. The first person is Miss Erica. She's from Italy. Do we request them to answer questions, or shall I read out? I read out? Okay. Why do we insist to use solar energy that needs accumulator instead of using moon energy? Frankly, I don't understand this question, but if any of the panelists can. Yeah, it's also written in Italian, if someone can